Welcome to Step 2 of Module 2. In this step, we will learn to understand our own conflict styles, goals, and interests. What lies beneath most conflicts? We all bring our own personal goals, preferences and orientations, and attitudes, attributes, and values to any conflict. In addition, there are other factors to be considered as well: self-esteem, cultural dynamics, religion, power, gender identity and expectations, and emotional concerns all play a role. One way we can begin to understand how our individual personalities affect conflict is to determine our conflict style. In 1973, Thomas and Kilman developed one way to envision conflict styles. Here we have created transportation metaphors to help explain the different styles. You might recognize yourself in one of these examples. Do you tend to avoid conflict completely? Maybe you like to try to stay above it all like an airplane. Do you tend to be goal-focused and sometimes take up more than your share of the road, like a big truck? Do you tend to try to help everyone else accomplish their goals, possibly at your own expense, like a taxi? Do you tend to try to fit everyone into an average-sized sedan when you might need to think bigger? Or are you able to find ways to get everyone on board and headed in the right direction, like a charter bus? In most situations, the collaborating style is an effective one in dealing with conflict. What about you? Take a minute to pause the video here and take the Conflict Management Styles quiz in the Resources section of this MOOC. Research on conflict styles shows that people most often see themselves as trying to solve the problem collaboratively. People most often see others as using controlling or aggressive styles. And flexibility in style equals effective conflict management. The important thing to remember here is that there is a time and place for using each of the styles, and none is completely wrong or completely right. Understanding our own natural inclinations can help us be aware of how we might need to diverge from our own preferences in order to be more constructive in conflict management. It is also important to understand the interests and goals involved in a conflict. Research shows that the better groups understand the problem, the more likely they are to come to a resolution. We can use the acronym CRIP to think about types of goals that people have in conflict. C stands for content. What do we want in a conflict? This is usually pretty specific and clear. For instance, one party might want a raise, while the other party wants to freeze salaries. R stands for relationship. Who are we together? This has more to do with how we see ourselves in relation to others. Examples might be when one partner feels a need to be treated with more respect, or when someone wants to gain the trust of his employees or employers. I stands for identity or face work. Who am I? This type of goal is about how we see ourselves. We may have a goal in a conflict of being seen in a certain light, or we may want to ensure that others do not change a positive view of us, such as being seen as a hard worker. P stands for process. How do we want to do this? This has to do with how the conflict will be resolved. Will the conflict be worked out in a public meeting, in a brainstorming session, one-on-one? We will talk much more about the different methods of resolving conflict, including negotiation and mediation, in Module 3. It is important to remember that these goals may overlap. We must also consider the interests that people have in a conflict. What are interests? Interests are the driving forces behind our positions. Positions are what we decide upon, or the content. For instance, I want a raise. Interests are what cause us to decide on positions. For example, I want a raise because I want my supervisors to acknowledge my importance to the company. Why is it important to focus on the interests behind conflicts? For every interest, there are several possible positions. Looking at interests often leads you to find alternative positions. Behind opposed positions often lie compatible interests. In our previous example, the person's interest was a need to feel acknowledged. Instead of a raise, an alternative position that might fulfill this person's underlying interest might be increased benefits or more job flexibility. When we understand our own conflict styles, interests, and goals, and seek to identify the interests and goals of those around us, we can be more effective in constructing conflict.